Welcome in, college football fans, and welcome to the First and Long College Football Show. I am your co-host, Marcus. There's your other co-host, Mason. We are on our countdown to kickoff, folks, and by the time this video is released, we're going to be within just really a matter of days before we've got college football again. Praise the Lord. Hallelujah. Thank the church. It's back, Mason. How are you today, buddy? We're about to talk some Ole Miss football, a team that's been at the top of everybody's mind this entire offseason, and really the last few years as Lane Kiffin has got in there and made this team relevant. How are you today, buddy? You ready to talk about some Rebels?
Yeah, man, doing good. By the time this episode releases, we will be 11 days from the start of kickoff. Um, Mark and I are both jazzed up. I cannot wait, and I really can't wait to see what Ole Miss does with another revamping of their roster. The Portal King does it again, and probably gets his best haul yet. This was a tough breakdown to do because there are so many new faces, but with the transfers, it's not too terrible because you have seen these players play at other places, so you kind of get familiar with their stats and what they did with the other teams. But there's a lot of moving parts here. Excited to break it down with you today, Mark.
We learn a ton about these teams offensively, defensively. We pull up the schedule at the end of these videos and we give our predictions for the year and just kind of talk through those games and how we feel like those games are going to go and how the flow is. And not to spoil anything, but I think the schedule sets up really good for this team this year. As you said, Mason, it was certainly uh, it was the best haul in the transfer portal in the country by any team, and pretty much any ranking you want to look at. This was the number one nationally ranked transfer portal class, and yeah, the Portal King does it again, man. And what I'm most impressed with is the he did it almost perfectly even between offense and defense. I mean, there's players throughout the entire roster that he got from literally all corners of the country, and it's quite fascinating to watch it here in real time. Again, I want to thank you for watching. If you're an Ole Miss fan and you're new to the First and Long College Football Show, welcome. I hope that you'll consider hitting the subscribe button. We're going to have a ton of fun in 2024 and beyond. We had a lot of fun with you guys in 2023, and 2023 was our first year. We were really figuring out how this whole thing goes, and we're just a couple of super fans just like you. So we hope that you'll consider supporting the channel and coming and hanging out with us. We'd love to have your unique perspective from the Ole Miss fans' perspective, or whatever fan base that you're a part of. You're welcome here at the First and Long College Football Show. We'd love to have you, and are looking forward to conversing with you in the comment section. Please let us know what you think about the Ole Miss Rebels this year, as we go through these position groups. We'd love to hear from you. Oh, the fans of the teams that we're covering, we learn tons from you guys, and we're very active in the comment section. We love to hear from you. So by all means, holla at us. The 2023 results for this team were, I think, exceeded most everybody's expectations, Mason, because we have watched this team over the last few years, and an old saying really comes to mind for me. It's an old Bobby Bowden saying: "Is first we lose by a lot, then we lose by a little, then we win by a little, and then we win by a lot." That's how this thing goes. It's a process, and the process is expedited more now in modern college football, than it ever has been before with the old transfer portal. You can flip a roster just like that, and but with all that being said, it's still a process, Mason. And we saw one year where Ole Miss did really, really well in the transfer portal, and I think culturally it kind of had some issues with it. So it's not just there's no magic silver bullet for this thing to just take the program out of the mud and into the top ranks of college football. But I feel like Lane Kiffin is fighting a good fight at Ole Miss, and I think that it's paying off for him. And you know, the more I've watched this guy, he's funny. He's very entertaining. He's always on social media, and whenever that first whole kind of thing began, it was like, oh boy, here we go. What's Lane going to say? But you know what, Mason, it's really kind of worn on me in a good way. I look forward to hearing what Lane Kiffin has got to say on lots of topics, and I think a lot of people feel that way. He's made Ole Miss football great again. How about that? What do you think about the 2023 season? 11-2, you get the Peach Bowl victory over Penn State. 35 plus points a game on offense. The defense was much improved, although there is room for improvement. We're going to go over it here in a few minutes, but it was much improved. I mean, you went from 120th something ranked, points per game defense to like 40th in the country. That's a massive improvement in one season. You got to be excited at the prospect of what Ole Miss did in 2023 and what's going to happen here in 2024.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Lane Kiffin has come in and really done an excellent job with this program. 11 wins last year was the most in program history, right? You win a Peach Bowl. No, those New Year's Six Bowls don't come too often for Ole Miss. And so to not only get in and get invited, but to win that game against a pretty tough Penn State opponent, I thought it was pretty miraculous, for considering where Ole Miss was just 3 seasons ago, I guess, not that long ago, right? And now you've seen the attrition and the roster being tweaked year after year after year, and suddenly we're talking about an Ole Miss team that can compete not just to be in the playoffs, but to win the national championship. And I think that really casual fans and even some in touch fans have a hard time grasping because of the Ole Miss brand and because
Yeah.
of Lane Kiffin, right? Lane Kiffin is a hell of a coach, but the one knock on his resume is that he hasn't won a big game, right? Winning the Peach Bowl last year was probably his best win, I think, of his career at Ole Miss so far. That's the only knock on Kiffin. His only 2 losses last year came to Georgia and Alabama, right? So now you get one of those teams back on your schedule. Let's see if you've closed the gap a little bit. That's kind of the only concern for me. That the roster is there. I think this year they've got a lot of weapons. Let's do our due diligence here and break it down for the fans. But let's see what kind of depth is hidden in this roster, because we know the starting 22 is going to be pretty good. But behind them, that's what you're going to need to win a championship this year.
And to do that, you've got to have talent acquisition, and you've got to have a process in place, and that takes years to build. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about the process. And Lane Kiffin has taken the time to do so, I feel like, and the transfer portal certainly helped. But yeah, it was, just to kind of piggyback off of what you said for just a second. A lot of people have said that Lane Kiffin he hasn't won the big games. And that is true. I totally understand that. The Georgia game last year comes to mind. You give up 52 points there to Georgia, right? It wasn't a great defense last year. It still wasn't great. It was much improved over 2022, but it wasn't great. It was a new system also in 2023, right? Not an easy one to pick up. We'll talk more about that when we get over to the defense. But in 2024, you're heading into the second year of that defense, so I believe that helps as well. But think about if Nick Saban, and I'll play devil's advocate here for a second. Imagine Nick Saban was the coach of that team, last year or the Ole Miss team the year before. I don't think he's beaten Alabama roster if Lane Kiffin was coaching Alabama at that point. If roles were reversed, you know what I'm saying? I don't think it's a Lane Kiffin thing is really what I'm getting at. I think
Right.
it's okay, we're losing the games that we're supposed to lose. And it's the same thing that's going on with James Franklin at Penn State. And it's like we beat the people that we're supposed to beat, and we beat them badly, right? Typically. There was a couple of exemptions to that last year with some of the scores of the games, but I digress. That's just part of it, man. You've got to get the guys, the Jimmies and the Joes, in there to run the X's and the O's. This guy knows the X's and the O's. Lane Kiffin's got that covered, no problem. But you got to get the Jimmies and the Joes in here, and it's got to be done through high school recruiting as well as the transfer portal. No team's going to be able to just rely on one. That's not going to work. because by the time
Yeah.
you get guys in the transfer portal, Mason, you only get a year or two with them, and it's hard to install a system that way. So you have to have the right mix of both to make it these days. You got Clemson that's on the other side of the spectrum. They're saying we're not taking any transfers. Well, guess what? That hurt them last year. So yet again, point proven. You've got to have that right mix. Recruiting is, like we said, one of the ways you do that. This team's around top 20 every year in recruiting. That's, in my opinion, I think that's good enough to get it done, especially considering whenever if you're going to be top 5 in the transfer portal every single year, which they have been so far, that the transfer portal's been a thing, then I think you can get away with that and probably compete on a national level, which I think that Ole Miss is more prepared to do this year than any other year. But that's something that's got to, continue in the right direction. I think it's headed in the right direction. It has to continue. And then the record versus the rivals, Mason, is just something that we have to pay attention to. 0-4 against Alabama, 2-2 against Arkansas, 2-2 against Auburn, 3-1 against Mississippi State. We just talked about it's not necessarily Kiffin's fault, all his fault, that they lose a game to Alabama. Alabama's a more talented team, but how do you explain Arkansas? Right? 9 times out of 10, Arkansas is not going to be a more talented team than Ole Miss, especially at this point. They're not going to be this year. I can promise you that. They weren't last year, and Ole Miss beat them by 7. So those are the teams that you've got to not only beat, you've got to beat them badly. And I think that's one of the stepping stones in becoming a dominant program. Let's jump over into the offense, and we'll talk about that. This was the 16th best scoring offense in the country last year. We talked about over 35 points per game. They did that. They beat everybody they were supposed to beat really bad, and then struggled to score points against teams like Alabama and Georgia. Scored 10 points against Alabama. Scored how many points against Georgia, Mason? I got it right here somewhere.
17.
17. That's not going to get it done. Believe me, I'm a Georgia fan. If you want to beat Alabama, you better score 30. That's the old adage between us Georgia fans. That's, if we don't score 30, we're not expecting to win and beat Bama, right? And that's it's really the mentality that you have to carry into these huge matchups that you would potentially see in a college football playoff, SEC championship game, so on and so forth. What do you think about the offense specifically last year headed into 2024? You got 83% returning production, but that doesn't even count what you've got coming in through the transfer portal. But what did you think last year, and how that kind of leads us into 2024? But some areas to improve, some areas that you would love to just stay the same, or maybe even get just a hair better.
Yeah, I mean, started with Jaxson Dart. I think that he's one of the best quarterbacks in the SEC. Had a really good season last year, even though he was hobbled for most of the season. Has been for 2 years straight now. Really anxious to see him at full health. You lose Quinshon Judkins. He was a pretty productive back, but behind him is Ulysses Bentley, who was actually more efficient. At least didn't get the number of carries, and thus didn't get the statistics that Judkins built up. Wide receiving group was excellent. You had 3 bona fide dudes last year. Trey Harris is one of the best wide receivers in the country. So really, really solid there. Offensive line was okay, right? I think that we want to see them get better up front, and I think that they did with the transfer portals that they brought in, the players that they brought in. I think that you're going to see a much more physical offensive line up front, which will bode well for this offense because Ole Miss, they really, as good as the receivers were last year, and as good as Jaxson Dart was last year, this was a run-first team, right? They were all season long and did a really good job with it. Now I think they're going to be even better at running the football, and they're going to be even better at passing the football when they need to. I do think that this offense has taken a step forward this year, but it was a great offense last year. I'm looking forward. This is a preview, right? Looking forward, I think that this one is going to be better than it was last year.
Yeah, I think you'd just like to see maybe a little bit of improvement from last year in third down area, and the run game, right? You'd like to see a little bit of more efficiency in the run game, I think is a good way to put it. But look, we'll throw 20. This is it. This is the last time we're going to talk about 2023 Ole Miss, guys. Really. Um, so let's put it all behind us and let's move into 2024 here and let's talk about the current roster we've got on hand because it's totally different. It's totally different, and we can throw a lot of those statistics out the window because there's going to be a lot of different guys in different positions. Even though you do got 83% return in production, Jaxson Dart, Mason, you talked about him. This is a guy. If I had to make a list of guys that were going to the Heisman ceremony and bet on him going, this is probably one of the first guys I'm writing down. I don't think there's any way that Jaxson Dart doesn't end up in New York at the Heisman ceremony this year. Something will just have to go really, really wrong, like an injury or something. Because you talked about the wide receivers he had last year. You only add to that group. You only make it better. Tight end, same story. Offensive line, going to be the same story. So why would this guy's numbers not get 10% better this year, right? 3,300 yards is nothing to sneeze at. Maybe you'd like to see the completion percentage uptick just a hair, but really it's just all about. I think if you're a fan of Ole Miss, you just want to see Jaxson Dart come in and run this offense maybe a little bit smoother, right? Be a little more efficient on third downs, play for the next down. You don't really have to do too much. You just got to distribute the ball and make sure your team's in the right play at the right time. So if there was something in the offseason for Jaxson Dart to really, really work on, it was probably mental more than anything. And I have no reason to believe that he's not going to improve in another year in this offense. What do you think? Jaxson Dart comes back to Ole Miss. Big deal for this program.
Yeah, absolutely. I love Jaxson Dart. I think he's top 3 in the SEC at the very least. Top 5 in the nation probably by the end of the year, statistically speaking. He definitely could be a Heisman contender for sure. I saw him take a really big step last year, right? It seems like we were looking at him as a below average SEC quarterback, and then last year he kind of burst onto the scene. We saw him get a marginally or super marginally better, I guess. And if he takes a similar step this year, yeah, you are talking about a Heisman finalist, if not a Heisman winner. Uh,
Yeah.
he looked much better last year, and now it seems like he's healthy, right? And it'll be the first season of him starting that he's going to be healthy. First season of him starting where he's not in a quarterback competition, right? Walker Howard's a talented quarterback behind him, a former 5-star, but he's not competing with Jaxson Dart this year. This is Jaxson Dart's team. Everybody knows it. The whole room knows it, and they're working to make sure that he plays his best football. And I think that's what we're going to see this year. You're going to see a healthy Jaxson Dart. This guy runs the football pretty well. He needs to learn to slide a little bit more, but runs the football pretty well. And he's a gamer. You saw him not be afraid to put the game on his back when the game was on the line, right? And it worked out for him more times than not last year. Super excited for him and for a healthy season for him. Especially given some extra weapons that he's got. I think he's going to do really well this year.
Let's talk about some of those weapons, Mason. We'll go ahead and transition into the wide receivers. I like to do the wide receivers right after the quarterback. Obviously for very obvious reasons, those go hand in hand or ball in hand, I should say. You return Trey Harris and Jordan Watkins. You couldn't ask for a whole lot more there out of returning receivers. I mean, Trey Harris has got a chance to be the best receiver in the country this year, bar
Yeah.
none. 54 receptions, 985 yards. This guy can do it all, Mason. He can make the acrobatic catches. He's a good route runner. Um, he's got unbelievable good and late hands catching the football. There's not much to not like with Trey Harris and 18.2 yards per reception. As crazy as it sounds, I could see that number going up this year. I could see him more like 20 this year and being tops in the country. I think if there's one guy on this roster offensively that could end up, other than obviously the quarterback, skill player wise, if there's a guy that I feel the best about ended up with over 1,000 yards, is Trey Harris. Now
Mhm.
the rest of these guys, I don't know, because you're going to have to distribute the ball a pretty good bit. You bring in Juice Wells over from South Carolina. He's dealt with some injuries now. We're going to have to see. You know, I think they ought to be able to rotate him enough to keep him like super fresh and not
Yeah.
risk injuries with him. Like I'm thinking if he's going to be okay with not being in there every snap, but um, I think they're going to be able to use him sparingly, and he's going to be able to just be kind of a weapon that you pop out there, and he's got fresh legs, and man, he's hard to deal with, man. I mean, he is way bigger than you think he is too. So it's three really good wide receivers in this room. I cannot say it enough. I am super, super excited to see these three starters. Um, you got Deion Smith coming in from the JUCO path. I've heard, you know, usually where there's smoke, there's fire, guys, and there's some smoke surrounding that guy. People saying that he really, really looks the part and is doing well there. We'll see how that goes as fall camp progresses. Aiden Williams and Caden Lee, they'll kind of be your depth guys. But as far as the starters go, if you don't have injuries with these three guys, you're talking about one of the most productive wide receiver groups in the country, probably the most productive, Mason, if they can all three stay healthy. What do you think about this group? Plenty of weapons.
Yeah, plenty of weapons. Very deep group. Um, Starting with Trey Harris. I mean, you said it. This guy's possibly the greatest wide receiver in the country this year. And what's really scary, I mean, last year played lights out, almost 1,000 yards, 8 touchdowns, only 3 drops all year. Had 45 first down catches last year, which is an extremely high number. A go-to guy,
It's insane.
reliable, especially with you throw in only 3 drops on 50. Well, more than that I guess he was probably close to 75, 80 targets, considering he had 54 receptions. So only 3 drops is pretty incredible. Sounds like he's having a really good spring and fall camp. They're saying that with bringing in Trey Amos from Alabama, who is also having a really good camp, they're saying that those two are going good on good in practice and sharpening each other's skills. I mean, iron sharpens iron, right? Well, Trey Harris and Trey Amos are getting better, which is a scary thought for other teams in the country because Trey Harris was one of the best last year. So now he's getting a lot better. Going to be really fun to watch this year. And then Juice Wells is probably the most talented of this group, and he finally gets a chance to get away from South Carolina and not be the guy, right? The guy that you put everything on when the game's on the line. He'll be in a group of guys like that. And so maybe, and not saying that he needs to be a complementary piece. This guy can absolutely take a game over, and is a problem for sure. But let's see if we can get him 6 to 8 catches a game and not rely on him for in a big game, right? And maybe 3 or 4 in some of those smaller games and get him out. But not putting so much workload on this guy is gonna help him with his longevity. We didn't see him in spring because he had just had his foot surgery, which is a surgery he had been putting off for a while. So he's gonna come into fall practice healthy, and I think we're gonna get the best Juice Wells that we've seen yet. And even if he were to just duplicate what he did in 2022, I mean that would be incredible. A guy had just in 2022 68 receptions, 928 yards, 6 touchdowns. Playing with South Carolina, he was 75% completion percentage when targeted, and of those 928 yards, 555 were yards after the catch, and he forced 19 missed tackles. It's pretty remarkable season for him. I'm sure Ole Miss fans would say, hey, we got Trey Harris. If Juice Wells could just duplicate those numbers, we'd be just fine. It's probably not going to work out that way. You're probably not going to have 2,000-yard receivers or close to it, but crazier things have happened. I mean, we just saw a duo at LSU last year have some pretty good numbers themselves. So On top of that, I mean, Jordan Watkins comes in for his senior year, had 741 yards himself last year with 3 touchdowns. So really good slot receiver there. And they're saying Caden Lee, as a true sophomore, is just lighting it up in spring practice and in fall practice this offseason. Caden Lee, it may be tough to keep off the field with the way it sounds like he's performing. And then Aiden Williams, another true sophomore who is very talented. Just didn't get to see the field a lot last year with in such a deep group. Maybe we see him creep up a little bit and get some more targets. And then behind them, there's just a ton of senior transfers: Micah Davis, Devin Price, Jordan Smart, Deion Smith. Samari Bruce. A lot of junior and senior transfers who are bringing in a ton of experience and a lot of competition, right? And so when you're talking about a championship program, all these programs have competition at practice, and that's exactly what this wide receiver room is doing now. I think it's one of the deepest in the SEC, one of the deepest in college football, of wide receiver units, that is. And I'm really excited to see what I'm excited to see who pops, honestly. I know Trey Harris and I know Antoine Wells are going to pop. I know Jordan Watkins is super reliable, a possession type receiver. One of these other guys behind them is going to go off this year, and I'm excited to see who it is. And when I say go off, I'm thinking like 500 yards and 6 touchdowns or something like that. But there's a lot of talent behind the starters in this unit, and that's what you need for a championship program, to have that depth.
Absolutely, Mason. I agree 100% with you right there. I think you need Deion Smith and Caden Lee. You're going to need those guys at some point this season to help your team out, because the odds that all three of these guys play every single game this year are just not great. I mean, this is college football in the SEC. If Trey Harris is going to have 60 receptions, he's going to get tackled. He's going to get tackled at least 55 times, right? Something like that. So 50
Yeah.
times, whatever you want to say. So, I mean, yeah, it's a risk that any offensive player takes. But I'm interested to see how the depth is in this room, because starter wise, A+, depth wise, you know, what would we rate the second team here? Probably average or average plus a little bit. So we'll have to see. Hopefully, we don't have to see those guys. I don't want to predict an injury, but those are things that you got to be prepared for. This is a physical game for sure. Let's talk about running backs, Mason. This has been a kind of a weird room for this team.
Yeah.
Um, there has been a lot of comings and goings over the last year or two, or however you really want to look at it, 3, I guess. Um, but from everything I understand, these are your dudes right here that are pretty much going to be toting the load. Ulysses Bentley the fourth is going to be the bell cow back of these 3, which is kind of interesting because he's never been that. He's always kind of been a complimentary back. That's literally my only question with this guy. He's got all the measurables really that you're looking for. He seems to be the part. It's just I've heard multiple people as we've done our research on this say, he's never been the go-to guy. How is he going to handle that? And my thinking in my head is, okay, there might be some validity to that thought, but at the same time, is it just because he's just never been the guy? And that's why we're saying that. And now he's going to be the guy, and he's just going to take the reins. He's going to take off with it. You know what I mean? So just because we say he can't be the bell cow back doesn't mean that he can't be. So I'm interested to see how that plays out. And he's got plenty of experience. This guy knows what he's getting into. He's a returner on this team, a leader on this team. So I fully expect Ulysses Bentley to have 120, 140, 150 carries this year, or more, right? And then Henry Parrish is a guy that has had over 100 carries 3 out of the 4 years of his college career. So I suspect that he's going to have something similar to that, maybe a little less, maybe 70 or so. But this is a good running back. Henry Parrish is a good one that you get over from Miami. And then Rashad Amos. And wasn't Rashad Amos from Miami of Ohio?
That's
Wasn't that
right.
right?
Yep.
So you get a one running back from Miami of Florida and one from Miami of Ohio. And when you're doing research on a bunch of teams, that's really nice to go ahead and just confuse you real good and make you
Yeah.
go back 3 times and double check your work, because that's what I did. Look, Rashad Amos is not – he was a 1,000-yard rusher. Um, he's not going to be that in this offense, okay? I can pretty much tell you that because he's not going to get the carries to get to over 1,000 yards. He was on a team last year. Let's see, Rashad Amos. He was on Miami of Ohio and South Carolina before that. He is a senior, 6'2", 235 pounds. So he's got the measurables and stuff, but he did a lot of that work on kind of a bad team, right? And I just don't suspect he's going to have anywhere near 210 carries, maybe 50, maybe 70, something like that. But he is a nice complementary piece considering, like you said, Mason, you lose your star running back after last year. He goes over to Ohio State, and that kind of shocks the world. Then you get this other dude, the one that ended up transferring to you, but then transferring
Yeah.
to Arizona right after. And then Logan Diggs.
Krosky Merritt. Yeah.
Yeah, that was weird. I didn't even understand really what happened there. And then you've got Logan Diggs, but he's hurt. We don't know when he's going to be back, if he's going to be back. That's the only reason I didn't include him on here. I don't know. I don't know that he'll be back or not this season. So, and I don't think anybody necessarily does. I mean, he could pull a Cam Rising, and it could be middle of next year before we see him. So, um, you know, it this running back room is pretty good, Mason. I like Ulysses Bentley and Henry Parrish pretty good. Rashad Amos is a decent complementary piece. Bentley's going to get the bulk of the carries, and we'll see how he does in a RB1 role, a true RB1 role. That's not something we've gotten to see from him. Um, is this the best unit on the offense? No. Is it serviceable? Yes, I think it certainly is. What do you think about the running backs?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think you've got three um, solid pieces, right? None of these guys are going to make the All SEC team, first, second, or third, more than likely. But I think that you've got some service here. You know, you've got some experience here, right?
You
This is a
do.
really experienced team as a whole, and this unit is no different. I think that Ulysses Bentley might just need to get his motor going. I mean, I played fullback in high school and in school, and one of the things that I needed was to be fed. I needed to get my legs going to really make a difference and gash a defense. The first couple of carries I was cold and I didn't carry very well, but after a few carries, things started moving down the field a little bit better. Maybe Ulysses Bentley is kind of the same way, and a lot of running backs are like that. They say, "Hey, I'm best after 10 carries," right? So who knows? We'll see. We'll see what Bentley can do. But he was, I think he's been a really good back. He's been fun to watch. Kind of hot and cold, right? I
Mhm.
do see that out of him. But he's going to have to carry the load this year, and I think he will come in and perform. And then, I mean, you mentioned the other two. I don't really have a reason to rehash that. Two solid pieces. I think Henry Parrish could probably be. Honestly, I think that I liked Parrish last year as well. I liked watching him run. I think that him and Bentley could be kind of a 1A, 1B. I could see both of them getting 15 carries a game, and then Rashad Amos getting like 5 or 6, mixed in here and there. I think that that's probably more likely to happen than Bentley kind of being the workhorse or anything like that. I don't think that he's going to be that Quinshon Judkins type who's more about quantity over quality of runs. But overall, this is a pretty good unit. I think it's good enough. I was concerned when Logan Diggs went down that
Yeah.
they weren't going to be able to have anywhere to go to. And picking up Amos, picking up Bentley, or excuse me, picking up Parrish, I think is about as good as you could do. I think you got two guys that if you hit on one of them, you're going to feel really good about the running back room.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. I think they're good. Tight ends, Caden Prescorn. Now, all Ole Miss fans, kind of. There's a lot of hype around this guy after last year, and um, especially after that. Wasn't it Sugar Bowl? Wasn't that what they were in? No, it wasn't the Sugar Bowl. It was
The Peach Bowl.
um, Peach Bowl. That's what it was. My goodness. He had a really great day. I think 10 catches, 130 something yards there in that Peach Bowl. Really kind of a coming out party, and it was a lot of it had to do with. I mean, he was one of the only options on the field at that point in the season. But I digress. He had a really good day. This guy's got really good hands. I think that he's going to be a nice piece in the tight end room, and he can block as well. Daquan Wright, he comes over from Virginia Tech. As you can see, the only concern there was no touchdowns. So that was kind of weird, right? 366 yards, 28 receptions, and no touchdowns for this guy. Big target. All quarterbacks like big targets in the middle of the field, Mason. And, you'd like to think that these guys could help out a little bit more in the red zone, but there's so many good wide receivers on this team. If you're throwing the ball, you might be better served to go to the wide receiver group. But all in all, there's just pass catchers everywhere in this
Mm-hmm.
on this offense. I mean, everybody's got pretty good hands or better. So
Yeah.
I like the tight end room. Not like a ton of depth, I guess you wouldn't say, but I don't think this, you can only hold so many awesome tight ends in a room, captive. There's only so many of them that play a lot of times just one at a time. Right. So I like this room for all intents and purposes. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, look, this isn't an offense that has featured the tight end
Right.
since Lane Kiffin has been there. Part of that is because he hasn't had the dudes, and part of that is because that's just not the offense that he generally runs. It seems like, at least. Maybe now that he's got Wright and Prescoring came on late last year. He scored all four of his touchdowns in his last three games last year. So maybe seeing that from him will allow Lane Kiffin to feed the tight end room a little bit more. Daquan Wright, you mentioned it. He's a big physical tight end who can also catch. And then behind them, you've got Hudson Wolf, who's another big physical tight end who's more of a blocker. So maybe you see some 12 personnel. I kind of doubt it. I don't think that's going to be like a go-to formation considering all the talent that's in that wide receiving room. And then Dylan Hip comes in as a true freshman behind them. But this is a really solid group. I mean, for four guys, I mean, efficiency wise, as far as how each individual player is rated, this is a really highly rated unit on this offense. How they use them is kind of my question. I think that you should get Prescore more involved because to me, I mean, he's an all SEC potential tight end. If you feed him, if you continue with what you did the last 3 or 4 games of the year last year with his production, if you continue to utilize him in that fashion, this is a guy who can put up some pretty good numbers, be a pretty good tight end in the pass catching room.
Yep. All right, Mason, let's talk about the offensive line. All good team. I mean, this is what it comes down to for all good or great teams. If you don't have a good to great offensive line, you're probably not going to have a good to great football team. It is what it is. That's what it is. Lines of scrimmage matter that much. Defensive line, if you're going to be a national championship contender, you got to have a really good defensive line. Me and Mason have talked about that before. It's almost like a prerequisite these days for a championship. Mason, for all intents and purposes, we're going to sit here and go over this offensive line, name by name. You see them on your screen now. This is one of the best groups of the offense, I think. So deep, you go and just get tons of dudes. I mean, just tons of dudes. 222 total starts among offensive line players. That's number one in the nation, right in front of Oklahoma State, who I believe is like the most experienced college football team ever. Like seriously, I mean, I'm pretty sure that there are a bunch of 6-year dudes on that team. So to have any position group older than the Oklahoma State Cowboys and have more starts and more experience than them, that's saying something. Um, you bring back Caleb Warren, you bring back Michael Pettis, Jeremy James, you bring back Jaden Williams. Actually, is a returner as well. But I mean, you go and you get guys that are even better than what you had last year. In Diego Pounds. He comes over from North Carolina. You bring in the two guards from Washington. We know the success that Washington had last year. And boy, howdy, did they protect Michael Penix on a lot of pass attempts. I mean, just a ton of pass attempts. And I believe he was sacked 13, 14 times the whole season, right? So you bring a couple of guys over from, and by the way, this offensive line last year, Jaxson Dart was sacked 27 times, and that was good for around 75th nationally in sacks allowed. So I believe you're going to improve that number drastically this year. I mean, just really drastically. Now, I will preface, or I will kind of correct myself in one aspect. When you have a running quarterback and he goes on a design run and he takes a 1 yard loss, that's considered a sack. So not all of those were, he was shot back trying to pass and was sacked. So, take it with a grain of salt. But all in all, I think this offensive line is going to be better in all aspects of the game, Mason. Running the football, pass protection, getting downfield, hitting those secondary blocks. I just think this team is all around better than this position group is all around better than what we saw last year. Big improvements. And, oh, by the way, you got some incoming guys that are going to be pretty good as well, including William Eccles, 4-star interior offensive lineman. The interior of this offense is just absolutely set up. 3 seniors from left guard to right guard, and guys with tons of experience, as we said. Couldn't ask for much more, Mason. What do you think about this offensive line?
Yeah, man. Really, you got three guys coming in to expecting to start here in Diego Pounds, Nate Kalepo, and Julius Bulow, who are all better than any lineman that you had on the offensive line last year, right? I think that's kind of there's no way to say that without saying that this unit is going to improve this year, which is going to be much needed if you're making a championship run. I like Diego Pounds a lot. It seems like he's really good in the as like a road grader and really good in the rushing attack. Not as elite in pass pro, but serviceable in pass protection. And then you go down to left guard, and you've got Nate Kalepo, who was just a huge pickup. Um,
Mm-hmm.
both of these Washington guys were really good. Nate Kalepo is probably a little bit better, but these are two guys who are coming off of a Joe Moore to winning offensive line last year in Washington, and they both can play, right? That's two of the 5 best in the country, so you're getting some good ones there. He's really good in the running game as well. So you got your left side shirt up as far as the rushing attack goes, at least. But he's also really good in pass protection too. Very versatile. Caleb Warren's returning from last year. He's a senior, all the experience in the world. The other Washington transfer, Julius Bulow, is not only is he good, but he's also versatile. When Micah Pettis was out this spring because of injury, they had Bulow kind of kicked down to right tackle, and so he's played a little bit on the end as well. So he's going to be a little bit versatile there. And Micah Pettis is returning. Obviously, he was out for spring, but a good solid piece there. And then another guy who's kind of making a buzz is a transfer from Southern Miss, Gerquin Scott. Seems like he may give the right guard a run for his money. He's kind of competing right there, coming over from Southern Miss, and if not, you at least have a good utility piece. But the main utility piece, I think, is Eli Acker, redshirt senior, 5th-year guy, can kind of play all over, inside, outside, doesn't matter. Every good championship offensive line has a guy like this, and I think Ole Miss might have 2 of them. Really solid group. I think that they got much more physical up front on both sides of the football. We can get in the defensive line here in a minute, but I think you've got some road graders up front for this Rebels team.
Really good on that side of the ball, Mason. I have to just tip my cap to Coach and all the Ole Miss fans that are part of that collective out there that helped make that happen. I mean, kudos. That is what a transformation this offense has taken. Because if you look at the roster they had last year, and if they would have just sat back and just kind of went through the motions again, this would not have been that great of an offense. I mean, you would have had a returning quarterback, but you would have had trouble on this offensive line, Mason. You would have had big depth issues. You would have had some holes in your starting lineup as well. That is a thing of the past. This offense doesn't have a ton of depth issues at all. Maybe, you'd have to have some serious injuries in one direct area before you're going to start to see a drop off, and that's what Ole Miss has been missing, and that's what it takes to be a champion. Um, Pete Golding, second year. We talked about defense earlier. Last year was his first year coaching. He had came over from Alabama, kind of ran out of T-Town, Mason. Ran him out on the first thing smoking, and uh, he he was kind of known for having a overly complicated defense. Lots of you do this if I do that, but if you do that, I do this. And it takes a while to pick that stuff up. I mean, that's defense in general. And I'm not claiming I'm not some kind of, X's and O's genius or anything like that. But from what I understand, it was a NFL style defense that was tough to pick up on. And a lot of people said, well, if he can't do it at Alabama with the talent Alabama's got, he's not going to be able to do it at Ole Miss. The jury's still out on that for me, Mason. I'm just going to be honest with you. I don't dislike Pete Golden. Do not get me wrong. But I look at these numbers, and these are very similar to what we saw at Alabama while he was there. The defense, I think they were a little better at Alabama while he was there, but the defense took massive strides because this was a horrible defense in 2022. Just porous, horrible, running like 3-3-5 type stuff. You know what I mean? It was bad. It was really, really, really bad. So it gets better, but there's only one category on this page that we see that's in the top 50. And so I'm going to need to see some more receipts on this guy before I'm willing to say, this is the right answer at defensive coordinator for the long term. But you certainly saw some good improvement from 22 to 23. We'll see what happens in 2024. It's a totally different team, Mason. This defensive line we're about to get into in a second, it's very, very good. A good defensive line can mask a lot of deficiencies on a defense. What do you think about the defense last year and Pete Golden and him kind of leaving his mark on this defense? And what do you think it means going into 2024?
Well, I think there are some good pieces from last year that they held on to, but I really feel like the overhaul that this Ole Miss team did on the defensive side of the football was completely necessary because they were very average in all facets of the game last year, and you're not going to win the SEC that way. You're not going to beat a team like Georgia. We saw the discrepancy between the two programs last year, so I think I think that the team collectively just said, "Hey, we gotta do whatever it takes to lessen the gap between these two programs to give us a chance to win a national championship." And I think they did just that. And I know we're about to get into the transfers, but ultimately, I do think that Pete Golding has to have better numbers than this year in 2024, given the fact that he's got the more talent on the defensive side of the football, but also there's a lot of pressure on this team to win right now. Not
Yeah, there
necessarily
is.
win a national championship, but you gotta make it to the playoff. I think it's playoff or bust for this team, and really need to win a playoff game. At least I think that's like the minimum that this team is expected to do this year, and most of that pressure is going to be on the defense. We feel really good about the offense. We just broke it down. I don't know that anybody's questioning that the Ole Miss offense is going to be good this year. We got a lot of questions on defense. Not questioning the players, but we're questioning this guy on your screen right here and whether or not he's going to be able to lead this team, lead this side of the football to be an elite unit, right? We haven't seen that from Ole Miss in my lifetime to where they were elite as far as, a top 10 defense, right? Can they get to that? Because I think now they've got the players, but is the scheme going to fit? Are they going to get developed? Right. Those are the questions that I have on this side of the football for Ole Miss this year. Yeah, ready to break down the players when you are.
57% returning production in 2024 from that defense last year. And Mason, just kind of put a cherry on top of that before we get into this defensive line you see here on your screen. Kind of my overlying my, my, overlaying point is you've got a complicated defense. typically, like a Kirby Smart defense, it takes a couple of years to get a guy acclimated, get him knowledgeable about what you're trying to do. Maybe things have been simplified a bit, but bringing in a bunch of transfers, especially guys that have 1 year in your system, it just makes me wonder. I'm like, is that not enough time to pick up on the responsibilities and the verbiage and the duties of your position? Not only your position, but on defense, you need to know what everybody else is doing around you. To play complementary football together. Um, so it makes me wonder. And I'm not saying it can't be done, but I'm saying I need to see it. I got to see it. Defensive line, you bring back some goods, you bring in some goods, right? Princely U, for all intents and purposes, probably the best pass rusher in the SEC right now. Or at least I think he can be if he's not already considered that. 15 career sacks there at Florida. He's going to be coming in and playing that buck kind of hybrid defensive lineman linebacker position there. You bring back J.J. Pegues and Jared Ivey. Um, I like what J.J. Pegues does for this defense. Um, really a big time hole plugger there in the middle. I like what he does, and to be a big guy stuck in the middle of that defense, absorbing blocks, sometimes double team. He's got decent stats from last year. Not bad. Um, just didn't have a ton of. I don't think he had a ton around him last year, and I think you bring in a guy like Walter Nolan as well as Princely U to come and help with that, and I think it certainly will. Walter Nolan last year, 37 tackles, 1 pass deflection, 4 sacks, and he did that at Texas A&M and was on everybody's rankings the number 1 transfer portal player in the country. And Ole Miss does secure him to come in and play. You got a couple of young guys coming in, incoming freshmen, and apparently a really good one in Cam Franklin. Apparently, he's going to be able to come in and help and provide some depth right away. You got a guy named Cameron Beavers coming in. He's a 4-star as well. Both of these guys are top 150 in the nation for Franklin and top 250 in the nation for Beavers there. So, and that's not to mention guys that you've really got to keep your eye on, because we're hearing, we said earlier, where there's smoke, there's fire. We're hearing about the smoke of Xavier Harris and Chamberlain Campbell. So those are a couple of guys that are going to provide much needed depth. You've got to be able to roll 2 groups of these guys. You got to have 2 groups of these guys to be able to roll in and out. To say the second group that you'd roll out is as good as the first would be a lie, but the first group's really good, and the second group I think is serviceable, right? And mostly unknown, mostly unknown. I'll give you that. So maybe the second group is a little better than what we think, even. But this starting group, I like these guys. By the way, guys, we're going to see lots of switching on this defensive line. So just because you're a starter one week, you might not be the starter the next week, but all these guys are going to play. What do you think, Mason? What do you think about this group? I mean, there's at least 8 guys that I'm very interested in. 6 of them I know what's up with them, and I feel good about them. What do you think about this defensive line group?
Yeah, I think it's definitely the most talented unit on the defense for sure. Prince U, starting with him, I'm with you. I've got him tabbed as potentially the best pure pass rusher in the country. Guy had 39 tackles last year, which is fine. 11 and a half tackles for a loss, 7 sacks, really good. 21.1% pass rush win rate. That is excellent. 10% is excellent. This guy doubled that. That's insane. 28 quarterback hurries, 21 run stops as well. That's what was most surprising in doing this breakdown is more than 20 run stops on top of what he did as a pass rusher. This was incredible. This guy's really awesome. Biggest addition on the defensive side of the football, no doubt. Second biggest to me is Walter Nolan coming over from Texas A&M. Look, the guy is really good. One of the best players in the country coming out in his class. The biggest question I have from him is, can he play consistently? Because we saw spurts of it, and we saw him play as a true freshman even, and really kind of wow you with his speed at that size and things. He's a freak. He's an athletic freak, and by all accounts, from everything I've heard from spring and fall camp so far, he's doing it this year. And the third year for defensive linemen, interior defensive linemen especially, is typically when you do see the bump. Finally, they've got the strength part. They've figured out the technique. They're learning more hand movements and things. So I think that this year you're going to see Walter Nolan turn the page and be a consistent defensive lineman, play himself potentially into a first round because talent wise, he's there. JJ Pegues in the middle as well. He's kind of he's also a genetic freak, but he's turning into a more he's morphing into a better defensive lineman and not just being that athletic guy that's playing in the middle of the defense. It sounds like he's getting much better in camp as well, which is a really good sign. Jared Ivey to me is just kind of a serviceable defensive end. He's gonna do what he can to contain. He's a Jag plus in my opinion. Pretty good though. Chris Hardy backing him up. It's just fine as a defensive end. I think you got a really solid number 2 back there. Xavier Harris, you mentioned, he played good ball last year, but it sounds like he's getting better this spring as well, and into fall. Akalo Stone, I think I'm saying that right. He's that defensive tackle that's a little bit undersized but has really good twitch. He gets to the quarterback really well coming from that defensive tackle position. I think you can put him in some pass only situations, and he could be really effective. And then on the 2 deep, the most impressive prospect has got to be Suntarine Perkins, who was a true sophomore this year, played as a true freshman last year, was a little overwhelmed, seemed like the game was moving a little bit too fast for him, but was still able to tab 38 tackles, 5.5 tackles for a loss, 3.5 sacks, and was actually only asked to rush the quarterback 130 times last year. So that was pretty productive considering that that's really not a ton of opportunities for him to pin his ears back and go. So I remember his recruitment. I remember as a Georgia fan wanting this guy. He's an absolute stud. And I think that he's finally found himself a home at the Buck sort of linebacker, defensive end, edge position. And I think it's going to bode well for him. This is a guy who could really be like a household name by the time the season's over. The only obstacle in his way this year is the fact that Princely U is playing in front of him. That's the only thing. I think he's going to have a really, really good year for Ole Miss.
I included him with linebackers, and I don't know which one he'll end up playing. If he's wanting to get a bunch of playing time, it'll probably have to be at linebacker because Princely U, I don't think you want to take him off the field, or maybe even in that defensive end spot. We talked about Jared Ivey. Jared Ivey is kind of a Jag plus, Mason. The athletic ability of him, I'm not sure how high that ceiling is compared to some of these guys, right? He's a bit of a robot out there, just a little bit. Some of these guys are kind of more of I don't know, free moving athlete, right? I don't think his athletic ability is at the level of some of these other guys, but yeah, Suntarine Perkins. I've heard lots of people say that he could be one of the guys that ends up with double digit sacks on this team. Maybe there's a possibility if there was 2 guys that could have double digit sacks, it would probably be him and Princely U. But you bring in Chris Paul over from Arkansas. I think this is kind of I think this is a good player. I don't think it's necessarily like a great player. You've got a guy like Kari Coleman waiting in the wings behind him. He's a returning guy. Got some pretty good stats, so I think you'll be able to plug him in there with Chris Paul as well. And I don't think you skip a whole lot of beats. This defensive line is good. The defensive line is really good. I think they're going to be able to keep a lot of the bodies off of these linebackers and let them go to work. You've got a good one, or at least you think you got a good one in TJ Dudley. We don't know. He's completely inexperienced. We don't know what is going to become of him. He was a pretty highly recruited guy, not like a 5-star or anything, I don't think, but a guy that we're waiting to see what he's going to be able to bring to the linebacker room and maybe provide a little bit of depth. But for all intents and purposes, this linebacker room is fine. I would give it like a B. I don't think there's I think it's a little better than average, right? I wouldn't give it a C. I would consider it probably a B. And I think that it's going to be just fine considering the insulation that it has with some pretty good players in the secondary, some really good players on the defensive line in front of them. What do you think about the linebacker room? Altogether, I feel like the front seven is better than last year. The overall numbers of this defense for that front seven, especially, should improve against the run and keeping quarterbacks contained and getting sacks. I think you're going to be good in those categories.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit tough to grade the room, not knowing kind of where Suntarine Perkins is going to play, and that kind of goes back to what I was saying. Like he needs to find a home, and
Mm-hmm.
learn there. He's only a true sophomore, so it's nice to be versatile, but I think that you know having him go back and forth would be a disservice to him. But nonetheless, outside of Suntarine Perkins, I've given you my spiel on him. I think that Chris Paul is good to a good to great middle linebacker coming over from Arkansas. You see the stats on your screen there. Also had an 8% missed tackle rate, which isn't too bad. 27 run stops, which led the team at Arkansas there. He's versatile. He plays the pass pretty well, and he steps up and plays the run as well. Um, from everything I've heard, this is a very intelligent football player, and so we could see him kind of being that field general for this team in the middle linebacker position. I think he's going to pick up Golding's defense pretty well. And another guy that I'm hearing a lot of buzz about in the middle linebacker room is T.J. Dudley. He was a Clemson transfer last year and is super quick at 6'1", 230 pounds. Apparently, he's got a lot of speed for that size and carries it well, and he's having a really good offseason. So don't be shocked to see him and Kari Coleman both kind of splitting reps there at that second linebacker position next to Chris Paul. Again, assuming that Suntarine Perkins goes down and plays on the line a little bit more as a sort of outside linebacker.
Chris Paul there in that picture, he looks like his mama gave him that nickname Pooh.
Yeah.
It looks like she was behind the camera. She said, "Say Pooh," and
Yeah.
he just looked at the camera like, "Man," which I kind of. My mom called me Marky Pooh, so uh, that kind
Chrissy
of hits
too.
home.
There you go. Yeah.
That kind of hits home with me. I think I'm gonna call my son Pooh. I always call him Stink right now. His nickname right now is Stink. Stink Carter. But maybe I'll switch it to Pooh. I don't know. That's pretty cool. Um, yeah, if your nickname's going to be Pooh, though, you got to be able to get out there and knock the hell out of somebody. Otherwise, it's not cool.
That's right.
Otherwise, you're getting made fun of. Let's talk about the secondary. We'll round this defense out, and we'll jump over to the 2024 schedule. Again, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. If you've tuned in to this point in the video, you must be very interested in Ole Miss football, as we are. Um, I get called a college football nerd from my family daily. Um, and um, I think that's probably true at this point. Not to name drop a YouTube channel name there accidentally, but we are kind of some college football nerds, Mason. I hate to say it. John Saunders makes his way back, or excuse me, John Saunders makes his way back to this defense, as well as Trey Washington. Actually, I don't. Was Trey Washington the transfer? I don't think he was. He was there last year, wasn't he, Mason?
Yeah. Yeah, he
I
was.
get
He's not a
confused with
transfer.
these guys. Um, and then all the other three guys in the bottom of your screen there are all transfers. Trey Amos comes over from Alabama. Brandon Turnage actually was at one point in Alabama, and then was at Tennessee for 3 years after that. He makes his homecoming. He's a Mississippi guy, so he'll be making his way back to play nickelback. It's looking like at this point. And then you've got Isaiah Hamilton, who had a really nice year at Houston last year. 50 tackles, 4 interceptions, 4 pass deflections as well. So I feel like you get some pretty good experience from him. He was at Texas Southern a couple of years before that, so he's looking to play his 4th year of college football. So got plenty of experience, none of which was at necessarily a big boy school level of football. Now Houston did move up to Big 12 last year, so he did play a Big 12 schedule. So I guess that is a little bit of a step up, but um, I like John Saunders and I like Trey Washington pretty good in this these returning guys. You've got Key Lawrence that came over from Oklahoma. You got Yam Banks that came over from South Alabama, and they're going to compete and they're going to provide some depth at safety. You might could see those other two guys starting by the time fall camp's over. I mean, you really could. There's so much competition going on. All these guys are going to play, though, Mason. I got a feeling. I think we're going to see lots of mix and match, um, especially in those first few games. We're going to get in the schedule in a minute. There's nobody on the in the first few games on the schedule really, other than Wake Forest, and who's. I mean, come on, give me a break. So we'll drop down to the cornerbacks and kind of talk about those. I think Trey Amos is a star on the rise. I think this is a future NFL guy, personally. I just don't think that all of his potential has been realized yet. Um, Isaiah Hamilton, like I said, I like him. Can he perform at this level? Is he a lockdown corner at this level? Probably not at this point, but I think he's serviceable. And you bring in a guy, Chris Graves, and you've got Richard O'Brien that are going to provide some depth there at cornerback, and they're going to compete some. I've heard some people say some good things about Chris Graves, Mason. So it's very possible to see him contribute. And then we talked about it before the video started. You've got Lewis Moore backing up Brandon Turnage at the nickelback. I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't see Lewis Moore start some games at nickelback. Me personally, his numbers are just way better than Brandon Turnage's. And he played at Indiana, where you play in a really good, conference, high level of competition. He had like 90 tackles last year, from the nickelback position. So I feel like you need to figure out a way to get that guy on the field and get him acclimated in this defense. And as I said, I think he's going to have opportunity to do that because I think there's going to be tons of plug and play over those first few weeks, whether it's to start the game or just later on in the game when you're blowing people out, because that's going to happen. Um, I think we'll get to see all of these guys. All in all, I think, me personally, I would give this room like a B. I think it's going to be good. We'll see how great it can be. I still got to see some of this stuff come to fruition for some of these guys, who haven't necessarily always been starters. Some of them role guys, some of them smaller school. What do you think about the secondary? I think we talked about it before the video got started. I think the more you get from the ball on defense, you kind of get more inexperience in some cases and questions in other cases and other positions. What do you think about the secondary group here?
Well, outside of Trey Amos, who I think is going to be a stud, this guy had on just well, I say just 340 snaps is a pretty good bit considering that he wasn't a starter, but 340 snaps, had 12 tackles, 5 pass breakups, 7.7 missed tackle rate, 45% completion rate when targeted. This is a guy who would have been Bama's starting cornerback had he stuck around. Decided to jump ship, and I think it's important to note as well that this is a guy who played for Pete Golding, who knows his system, right? So there's no learning curve there for him. He already knows how to play in this system, and I think he's going to play really, really well for Ole Miss. Outside of that, without rehashing what you've already said, there's a lot of unknown in this group, which is okay. When I look at what Pete Golding did on the defensive side of the football, what they brought in as far as transfers go, I see a lot of size and I see a lot of experience. Like there's a lot of juniors and seniors, redshirt juniors and seniors, fifth year guys, fourth year guys, a lot of experience. And then looking at kind of the roster, all of these guys are listed at 6'1" or higher, at least as far as the transfers go. So you're getting a lot of length there on the back end. I think that's going to be really, really important. But more important is going to be that experience that comes with it. My question, and when you look at their schedule, which we're about to get into, kind of backloaded, right? As far as a schedule goes, pretty easy schedule overall, but pretty backloaded as well. Can you figure things out on this back end within the first 3 or 4 games? Because I think you're going to need time for this unit to gel before you go, play some of your bigger games. Before you get to LSU, especially, you're going to need to have this figured out. I think with all the transfers that they brought in, they're going to be competing into the season. The unit, the 5 or 4, whatever they start with as far as their scheme goes, but the unit that starts will not be the unit that starts at the end of the season, right? I think that there's going to be some change and some changes made. How soon can you get to that final form and let these players gel together? Because you got to have some synchronicity on the back end of a defense. It's the most important aspect of your DB room is to gel together and play together, know what each other are going to do. And my question with bringing in this many transfers is how soon can you get up to speed and playing with each other, not only in a new system, but playing with each other. That'll be kind of the big question. But I think that there are some dudes in this unit, and if they can play together with each other, I think it could be a good unit. It's just on paper, looking at it, right now from a bird's eye view, I would agree with you. It's probably a B unit. We'll just have to wait and see. A lot of unknowns in this one.
Yep, and we're in fall camp. There's room to grow, man, and we're gonna get to see the product sooner than later. I just can't wait. Let's talk about the 2024 schedule. Mason, this team is predicted at a 9.5 over under by a lot of the Vegas totals there. Man, dang it, dude! I left the logo right there in the middle of the daggum schedule. You see that right on top of Wake Forest? Folks, if you watch this show enough, I have to
Oh,
mess up one slide. I have
I
to
see it
mess up
now.
one
They,
slide every single
if you're
freaking
watching,
time.
if you're watching on your phone, you probably can't even see that hardly. But if you
Yeah,
really squint hard at the Wake Forest logo, you'll be able to see that.
Jesus Christ.
Well,
It's
we're gonna
every
have to start
single
over,
time.
Mark. Let's start over, re-record this hour and a half long episode.
From the top, everybody. Uh, yeah, so let's go from the top of the schedule. Start off with Furman, Middle Tennessee. I think is that who that
Mm-hmm.
is?
Yep.
I don't. Who cares? It doesn't matter. It's Helen Keller School for the Blind and Deaf. Might as well be. Um, you go on the road to Wake Forest. That's the only sketchy thing about that is that you've got to literally go get on a bus and go head over there. I guess not a big deal. Probably a jet, I guess, for these guys. Um, and then you've got Georgia Southern at home. So you're starting off 4-0. You've got 4 weeks to figure things out. I heard somebody had kind of an interesting take on this, and I'll repeat it here. Not saying it's necessarily my belief, but they're talking about Georgia last year and how, or in years past, all years, the last few years, you go through those easy games and the expectations are really high for a team like Ole Miss this year, just like Georgia is the last few years, Alabama is the last few years, blah, blah, blah. When you play these little bitty teams, you can't score enough. It's just there's a such thing as style points. This isn't the NFL where if you win 21-0, that's an ass whooping, right? That's not what college football is. There's a such thing as style points, and if you were to go beat Furman 21-0, there'd be a lot of questions being asked. Um, if you did it 2 weeks in a row and then you went and beat Middle Tennessee 21-3, there'd be even more questions, right? You can't beat these teams bad enough. And I think we may go through that first month of the season saying, is there something wrong with Ole Miss? What's going on with Ole Miss? You know, and I could totally see them going out there and winning a game like that 31-0 and running the football, winning a game, 35-7. And people say, man, this team isn't as good as what I thought. And I don't think it means a darn thing because Georgia did that and won national championships in the same year that they did, had some goofy games like that. So I don't think it means a darn thing. Expectations are through the roof for this team. There's nothing to gain from these games other than maybe if you can get out there and beat these teams 70-0 or whatever. You start at the end of September, really, is when your schedule starts. You've got 4 preseason games to begin the year. Congratulations. Then you're going to host Kentucky. You're going to go on the road to South Carolina. That's very juicy and pun intended because that's where Juice Wells came from. And that place is going to be rocking. I hope that's a night game. If it's not a night game, curse you, whoever schedules these damn things. Curse you, TV programming. because that needs to be a night game for all of us viewers. We need to see that. South Carolina, their fans, it doesn't matter if they're 0-11, right? They're going to show up at that place. They're going to rock out with their Gamecocks out. That's going to be a win, but it's going to be really juicy, literally. LSU, Mason, you go on the road to LSU. Probably going to be a night game, Mason. And this is the game that Ole Miss has struggled with year in and year out. These are the types of games. It's not LSU specifically. It's these types of games. If Lane Kiffin and company can go into Death Valley and get this win, then it will have been the best win for Lane Kiffin in his career at Ole Miss, I believe. I mean, I would put it above the Peach Bowl. I would. That Peach Bowl wasn't a playoff game. I'm sorry, but it didn't matter a whole lot. They could, I mean, it is what it is. I hate to be that way. I love watching those games.
Penn
But
State sat out a lot of players too, and I'm sure that Ole Miss
they
fans
did.
have heard that a ton. But there were Olu Fashanu didn't play, Chop Robinson didn't play. I mean, a lot of the defense was not there. So, yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, with all that being said, can the secondary get it figured out, Mason, in time to play this team? Because LSU's got a hell of a wide receiver room, just like Ole Miss does. Maybe probably not as good as quite as good as Ole Miss, but it's very, very good, guys. Very, very good. They've got a good offensive line as well. They've got a quarterback that's experienced, hasn't started, but is experienced. The knock on LSU is defense, and we saw last year. I think there was like over 100 points scored in this game last year. I think it's going to be very similar to that again. I think it's going to be a really, really high score, and I think the point total will be at least in the 80s. I can't wait to bet on that game because I'm going to. I'm going over whatever it is, unless it's like 100 points or something. So with all that being said, LSU is going to be a tough one. Then you host Oklahoma after a bye week. That's nice. You got the bye week there. That place will be rocking for that. I think Ole Miss can win that game. Arkansas, Mason, I don't know why, but this is a really tough game for this team. They struggle against Arkansas almost every year, brother. What is the deal? I don't understand it. Really, I don't understand it. If Ole Miss struggles with Arkansas this year, then there is just something weird about that game. And oh, by the way, it's at Arkansas's place. So you got to go on the road and play that game. I guess you, as an Ole Miss fan, maybe you just hope that Arkansas is kind of down and out by then, and the fans aren't so into the game, and maybe you can go in there and it's not as much of a pressure cooker as what I'm thinking it is going to be. But if Ole Miss is somehow undefeated at this point, there's going to be a lot of pressure on Ole Miss, and I don't think there's going to be that much pressure on Arkansas, just to be honest. So we'll see what kind of pressure cooker that game turns into. You've got Georgia at home. I'm not ready to say Ole Miss is ready to beat Georgia. I got to see some of these games first. I'm picking Georgia to win that game. I won't waste anybody's time on that. Florida I think is an underrated game. You have to go there. Maybe Florida's down and out by that point. They've got the hardest schedule I've ever freaking seen in my life. So they may be, at that point in the season, they may be, 5-5 or something, right? And Florida Gators fans are not that much into it at that point. Who knows? And then November 30th, you're going to absolutely crack an egg, pun intended again, on top of the head of Mississippi State. So here's what it comes down to for me, Mason: LSU, Oklahoma, Arkansas. And I don't mean to write Kentucky off like that, but I think Ole Miss can take care of Kentucky at home. Although it may be a close game, it very well may be a close game. I think Kentucky's a little better than what people think they are. So I think that one could be a 10-point game or something like that, and that wouldn't surprise me a bit. But what can you do against LSU, Oklahoma, and Arkansas, who is your rival and you struggle with for some reason? I'm going to count on this team to beat Arkansas, even though that hasn't been a given. And I think this team could drop a couple of games, one of which probably be in LSU, Oklahoma, because I don't think this team's going undefeated. and because I think they're losing to Georgia for sure, and then I think they lose one of those two there, October 12th or 26th. Um, more than likely, the road game. So give me losses to Georgia, LSU, 10-2 for Ole Miss this year, and then it's going to be in the hands. Your fate is going to be in the hands of the college football playoff at that point. Because if you look at the schedule, what are your best wins after that? If you lose to LSU and Georgia, um, we'll just have to see where everybody's at that point. Mason, what are your predictions? What are you thinking, buddy?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I don't think you're going to struggle at all with the first four. You got 4 weeks to really figure this out. Like I said, figuring out that DB room, but figuring out other positions as well. I don't think there's as much to figure out in other rooms based on the breakdown we just did. But nonetheless, this team should be rolling by the time they invite Kentucky in and get to face them to open up SEC play, and then you got 4 or 8 SEC games in a row, starting off with Kentucky. And look, it's not the easiest SEC team that you could face. Kentucky's a very physical team. They're going to match up really well on the lines of scrimmage, and I think it's really going to come down to the skill position players for that game in the trenches. Look, it's not. I'm not saying that Kentucky has the same guys on offense and defensive lines, the same level of talent on offensive and defensive lines, but there's not a ton of drop off. This is an SEC, a true SEC offensive and defensive lines that they're very physical. You got a guy in Deion Walker on the defensive line that might be an all SEC defensive tackle when it's all said and done, and a couple of edge players who can rush the passer pretty well. I'll invite you to go back and look at our Kentucky preview from way back when. They were number like 34 on this list or somewhere in the way back machine. But nonetheless, Kentucky's going to be pretty good. They got a good quarterback in Brock Vandegrift coming in, a couple of good pass catching weapons. This could be an interesting game. They will have already faced Georgia at this point, if I'm not mistaken. So they've already got some SEC tape to go back and study, and they're going to be itching for a win. And you just better be ready. I do think Ole Miss wins this game, but this is one of those matchups. Like when I'm looking at these schedules, I don't think, oh, who's better and who's worse. That the better team's going to win. I look at the matchups, and Kentucky is a tough matchup for Ole Miss because of how physical they can play at the lines of scrimmage. If you don't have your DB room figured out by then, I think Brock Vandegrift could have sort of a coming out party against you, win or lose, right? I think he could have a day, and we could be saying, hey, this might be the next great, SEC quarterback or something like that. So you better have things figured out after those first 4 games on the back end of the defense, or you could find yourself in a troublesome game with Kentucky. I do think that South Carolina is better this year. I don't think they're good enough to get the upset against Ole Miss. Not that early in the season. I don't see that happening. LSU could be interesting. I've got to see their defense take a huge step forward, a similar step forward to what we saw from Ole Miss's defense last year to the year prior. Even if that's in the works, I think that you are looking at their defense and saying that they're behind where Ole Miss is. And I think that Ole Miss's offense is just as good, if not better, than LSU's defense going into this year. So I've got to give the edge to Ole Miss, even on the road in Baton Rouge. Look, you've got to add about 6 points, right? If this is a night game in Baton Rouge, add 6 points, and I think that Ole Miss is still going to be able to win that game by 3-6 or something like that. A one-score game. It's going to be really fun to watch for sure. Oklahoma, as high as I am on Oklahoma this year, their offensive line has some serious question marks. They are not going to play well against this Ole Miss defensive line, especially when this game's being played in Oxford. Give me a win for the Rebels on that one. Going and playing Arkansas on the road, I do think Arkansas is better this year. I think that they're going to figure some things out on offense. But if Arkansas is sitting at 3 wins at this point in the season, they may not even have Sam Pittman as a head coach. So a lot of unknowns there. But I think if If Bobby Petrino is kind of dialing up some plays for them and they're playing well, that could be a tricky game. I do think Ole Miss wins that game, though. Then you got Georgia coming to you, playing at home. That's going to help. This is going to be one of the best environments Oxford has ever seen, because I do think that this team could very easily be undefeated, right? Both of these teams could be undefeated going into this game. It's going to be pandemonium. It's going to be a very interesting game for sure. But ultimately, I mean, look, Georgia is going to play really well with you on and really physical up front on the offensive lines. This is going to be, or on the offensive and defensive lines, this is going to be the best offensive line that you've faced all year for sure. I don't know if they're going to be ready. I don't know if they're going to be ready up front for the physical type of game that they're going to walk into. I think that Carson Beck can kind of slice and dice this defensive backfield, pretty well. I know I'm biased. It's tough to kind of erase the bias and all that, but I just think that they've got the dudes who have been doing it together with each other for longer, and they're more of a gelled sort of team. More of, you've got units that have gelled for longer. I just think that they're further along in the progression than where Ole Miss is as a team right now. I see it being a much closer game than it was last year for sure. But I think that Georgia wins and probably wins by 6 to 10 points, somewhere in that range. Florida, hey, maybe they've made a quarterback change by then. DJ Lagway's playing. That's kind of the only way I see this Florida team even competing with Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss has got the win there, and I think that Ole Miss, even though last Egg Bowl was only a 10-point win, I do think that Ole Miss beats up on Mississippi State pretty good at home. I think it's an 11-1 season, Mark, and I know that would be one historic season for Ole Miss, but I think that they do it again. This is a really good unit, a really good team with really good units, I guess, but it's also a really easy schedule considering where they're at now. It seems like we've done a Missouri breakdown now and an Ole Miss breakdown, two teams that were in the top 12 at the end of the regular season last year. It really seems like the SEC did them both some favors when it comes to the schedule making, because they looked at an opportunity to have two other teams in the college football playoff, two teams that would potentially be outside of it, in normal years, I guess, in down years or average years for them. But with what they bring back, they're two teams that I think are going to be in playoff contention for sure. I'm really high, obviously, on Ole Miss, and really excited to see what they do this year. Don't let me down.
Yeah, if you're not an Ole Miss fan, just stick a pin in that, and you can pick up right where we just left off on September 28th, right? Whenever you play Kentucky. For me, for a guy like me, I don't mind that a bit. Ole Miss fan, if I was a Georgia fan and I had to wait until basically October to get my first real game for my team, which I've had to do several years, there's been several years where we didn't really play a big matchup until, like October or whatever. Kind of boring at first, but I think it's really necessary for this group to get all these new players and coaches and everybody acclimated together. And I think it's going to serve the Ole Miss fan base very, very well. So whenever I start watching Ole Miss football again in October, I can't wait to talk about some of those big matchups, because those last 8 to 10, or I guess it's technically 9 or 10 weeks of the season, that last 9 or 10 weeks are going to be crazy, crazy interesting, action packed. No rest for the wicked. And Mason and I won't be resting. We will be all over it, and we hope that you'll be with us. So please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button for this video. We want to try to get this video out to as many college football fans as possible. And we're building an awesome community here that we want you to be part of. What community doesn't have a million different perspectives? And we would like all teams from all over the country to bring your perspective to the First and Long College Football Show. We'd love to hear from you and be a part of that. We're going to have a ton of fun. Thank you so much for watching and signing out for the First and Long College Football Show. I'm Marcus. That's Mason. We'll see you next time.